All right, so welcome to the Vedic Health Collective. My name is Anuradha Dasi, though in some circles I go by Asha. And with me today, I have the very wonderful Harmony Williams. I actually met her last year at a vegan festival, and I think this was in Atlantic City, right?
Yeah.
The first one. And we've sort of developed a friendship over the few months that we've gotten to sort of know each other, interact with each other. And I was sort of deeply impressed with her background. And I remember finding a card of hers, and it very much aligned with my own practice in terms of being a physical therapist and working specifically with perinatal to pregnant to postpartum women, and really trying to build a connection spiritually, even, and having that as like the foundation and underpinning of my practice. So I'm so grateful to have her on today. I wanted to just quickly introduce you. So you're a mother of two, and I got to meet one of your babies, baby Raiden. You're also a parenting coach, a postpartum doula, a Kemetic Reiki practitioner, which I found was very interesting, and I would like to know a little bit more about that. You're also the founder and owner of Parenting with Harmony, and you also have a podcast, Harmony Awakened, which is basically kind of like a life coaching experience. So I wanted you to also be able to just share a little bit more about yourself, get us acquainted with you a little bit better. So yeah, please take the floor. Thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I am Harmony Williams, and I have just been really honored to be able to wear so many hats, let me just say, along my journey. And a big part of the reason why I think it's important to share what I do and sort of what some of those hats are is because there was a time where I had people telling me, well, just pick one thing, just pick one thing and just stick to that. And I started off working as a preschool teacher, and I knew I wanted to, work with kids. And I thought I was just going to end there, just being a preschool teacher, maybe an administrator, be a director one day, maybe even own my own center. But that was sort of the gist of it. But as I continued working with families, I started to work as a babysitter for some of the families that I was their, child's preschool teacher, because we had created such a bond and the children get so attached to you as their caregiver. So it just makes sense that the parents are like, oh, my kid already knows you. They like you. They see you every single day. Are you available evenings and weekends? So I started doing that evenings and weekends. And then eventually I got offered sort of the nanny position of a lifetime that I couldn't resist. And so I decided to leave being a preschool teacher and to work full time for a family of a little one we were so close. It was just like very obvious. We had a very special bond. And that was a very beautiful opportunity for me to sort of transition out of the classroom into the home environment. And with that same mom, she became pregnant during the time I was taking care of her baby. That by that time, I believe the baby was maybe about 15 months, getting close to 2 years. And so she asked me, like, would I be willing to, assist her with her baby? And I said, absolutely, but I wanted to make sure that I had more to offer her than my experience as a preschool teacher. And I grew up in a community of birth workers. So I knew that what she really needed was a doula. And so I decided to take a community training at a local hospital to become a volunteer doula. And based off of those skills, I was able to assist this mom, during her labor, and throughout her pregnancy, which was an amazing experience for me because I had not thought about doing that, as a preschool teacher. And so once I was working with her, I'm taking care of her child that's, almost 2. Now we have the doula experience where I'm helping her, through her pregnancy and then up until her giving birth in the hospital, which was a magical experience. And then once the baby came home, I needed a whole nother set of skills because I was like, well, I'm usually just the preschool teacher, which means I get them after 6 weeks. 6 weeks is sort of the earliest that they come into a center. But now I'm home on day one when the baby is like 5 days old. And I'm like, ooh, what do I do here? I hadn't had my first child yet. So once again, I decided to do some research, take a certification class, and find out how I could support this mom postpartum. And I found a postpartum doula training. So I took that training, and then I also found a newborn care specialist training. So I took that one too, and I continued working with this family for 12 weeks. I stayed every night at this family's house from about 9 p.m. to about 3 p.m. the next day. So just imagine, overnight, I'm taking care of the baby, I'm with mom, up in the middle of the night. I stay the night into the morning, and then now I've got the older child that's also waking up. So me and mom are sort of tag teaming, and then I'm off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go home, get rest, take care of myself. And then I'm back at 9 p.m.
Wow.
And I did that for 12 weeks straight, every single night.
Wow.
So of course, it becomes sort of a life-changing experience because now this mom was really opening up and sharing a lot with me about what was happening in her personal life. I mean, I was there so much that I was seeing it. And then I began to see some things in her relationship with her husband, and again, I didn't have a whole lot of experience, at that point, I had not yet been married. I was in a serious relationship, but it was just like, wow, how do I help her at this point of her journey, And so I did some searching, and I found that the way that I was supporting her by just listening, sharing from my own experiences and the things I had learned along my journey was very similar to what a life coach does. And so I decided with my partner that we both decided to take a life coaching certification program. We actually took 2 separate programs. And I felt so empowered at that point that I really have an enormous amount of skills now to help a mom who goes from, having a child to, having that child in preschool or daycare, and then having a second child and needing support through pregnancy and then through birth, and then now being a mom of 2 and having this newborn, plus the older child, all of these dynamics that there really isn't a title or a job out there that covers all of these things, so I'm trying to keep up by, making sure that at every level that she needed me, I could adjust and accommodate her in this holistic, way to sort of wrap around, all these services around her. And then, around the time that the older child was maybe about 5, her and her husband decided they were going to separate. And I was kind of nervous, am I going to keep my job? What's going to happen? How are we going to continue to do this? And I was pulled into the legal part of that, which I, again, had no experience whatsoever, but I was able to just be there for her. We researched documents together and sort of the whole process of what separating looked like. How could we do it amicably? What visitation would look like? Would I go back and forth between the homes so that, when it's dad's turn, I'm at dad's with the kids. When it's mom's turn, I'm at mom's. And truly navigating their separation and divorce ultimately. And after that experience, I found a training that was specifically for divorce mediation. And I thought, wow, the next time I ever go through this, I want to have a set of skills that allows me to walk a family through that as well. So it just kept building in that way that for this one family, the dynamics that they were going through were so vast. And over the years that I worked with them, for a total of 5 years, I watched them go through all these transitions that, again, you would normally need 5 different people, but because they trusted me so much, they wanted me to be the person to walk them through. And eventually we even got to some sticky ground where I needed to be a supervised visitation monitor for visits with dad, who was struggling with some substance abuse at that time, based off of everything that was happening. And the children came to a point where they didn't feel so comfortable. They weren't as safe with him because of his substance abuse. So as a supervised visitation monitor, I was there not just to nanny or babysit them during visitation, but I had to be there in order for him to see the children and to support him in making better choices to not use alcohol when he knew he was going to have time with the children.
Wow.
And that kind of weighed on my heart a bit because, again, that was more sticky and didn't feel so great. But as I looked over the 5 to 6 years I was with that family, and when they, finally decided that we were going to separate, mom had gotten full custody and was moving out of state to live near her family. And sort of my job was done, but I was so full. I had so much I wanted to, every family I met after that point, anything that they needed, I felt prepared to do, and so that's really how Parenting with Harmony was birthed. That's really how Harmony Awakened life coaching and relationship coaching, parent coaching was birthed, because I wanted to find a way to bring all of these wonderful skills together and to package them to offer to families, despite whatever they may have been going through, that I felt fully equipped to handle, anything that they needed. So that's really how all these wonderful offerings came together. And I think once I had my own child and went through my own birthing experience, I found myself seeking some more holistic and spiritual healing after that experience. I had a sort of a difficult labor experience, although my pregnancy was beautiful. And so in that transition of me going from being caregiver to mother and needing to spend time on my own self-care, my own healing, that's when I was introduced to Reiki. And I was going to get, Reiki done. I was doing Ayurvedic massage. I was doing acupuncture and acupressure, and I was just opening myself up to a whole, gamut of holistic resources and services. But the one that really felt like I could do it and I could offer it without needing to go to school, because some of those things you have to be highly trained in doing, I felt really empowered to do Reiki, and it just really spoke to me. And I didn't use it initially, like I just learned about it, received a lot of it. And it wasn't until a couple years later that I actually found Kemetic Reiki that really allowed me to step fully into my role as a healer and to learn about different healing modalities that I could offer to my clients who are looking for a more spiritual experience. And so, again, this is just another thing that I added to the list of services that I could offer families. And now I feel like really complete, in doing so, that I have all of these different experiences, the set of skills, these certifications, and like all this information and wisdom, my own children and my own experiences as a married person, as a single person. And really just being able to honor that I've done the work to create sort of this this oasis, that I can create for any client that I have. So again, I appreciate you sharing, that small intro, but there's sort of this vast, well that I pull from that allows me to meet my clients where they are. And so I'm just so honored, to be able to share that when I do meet families and to talk about what that has meant for me, in my journey as a professional.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very interesting, I mean, yeah, that basic intro that I gave, it doesn't capture, your full story. And I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. I wasn't expecting, sort of a 5 to 6 year experience with just one family. And, you sort of just trying to literally meet them where they're at in terms of being able to be a resource for them and help them along there. And the fact that they had an attachment to you and they felt that they could confide in you and trusted you enough that you could be that person. You could be that person with all those hats on, and help them to navigate through their various situations. And it stinks, of course, that anyone has to go through a separation and due to whatever circumstance that there is. But the fact that you could put on that hat and play that role for them in their time of need, essentially, really, in from that entire time, from the mom's time of need, father's time of need, that's amazing. It's so amazing. Um, and I actually kind of wanted to circle back because you had mentioned about becoming a postpartum doula as a result of her giving birth to her second child, and then also becoming a newborn care specialist. So I guess, like, what are the differences between a postpartum doula and newborn care specialist, and kind of like what did that entail for you? Did that just entail for you to help the mother like get up, or like with breastfeeding, or how was that? Like, what was your role?
Yeah, that's a great question because they are very similar, to be honest. However, postpartum doulas typically spend the daytime with the mom, and it's usually maybe about 4 hours, typically 4 hours, maybe for a full day, but usually 2 to 3 days a week. You never really see a postpartum doula doing like 5 days a week, every single day, all day long, because that feels more like a nanny. And so the postpartum doula is really just there specifically for that first 12 weeks when mom has come home from the hospital, she's home with baby, and she really needs help navigating that new experience of being home with this brand new baby. If it's her first child, wanting someone there that has the expertise to be able to guide her and coach her in any areas that she may need that assistance. And if it's a second or third child, being able to customize the type of guidance and coaching to support her in the mindset that she's in as a mom of 2 now or 3 now, and like how different that may look. She may be more clear about what type of support she wants this time around because it is her second or third child. And so she can like speak for herself and advocate for herself much better than a first time mom who has no idea what she needs, or, feels like she needs everything because she isn't confident yet and just wants someone to literally hold her hand, through that process. So when I have worked as just a postpartum doula, typically I have not met that mom, prior to her giving birth. It's usually something that she's seeking thereafter, or very close to the time that she's giving birth. So you're not going through the birthing experience with her, or even through the pregnancy experience with her a lot of times. Sometimes moms will be proactive enough to reach out when they're pregnant, if they know about postpartum doulas, to say, I want to set this up, for as soon as I'm done, having this baby. But sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes that, the family will reach out to a doula agency and say, hey, we're due on such and such date. We're looking for a postpartum doula because we know we're going to need help at home. And so maybe there would be an opportunity to meet that family at that point. But a lot of times, most of the times, at least in my professional experience, the mom has already come home and sort of tried it on her own, is struggling, and reaches out to friends or does a Google search and learns about postpartum doulas thereafter, and then reaches out to either a professional that's been recommended or an agency so that they can have support, once they've maybe tried it for a week or two and they're really struggling, that sleep deprivation starts to kick in, and, they recognize that they need that help, so again, as a postpartum doula, I would come in during the day for a couple of hours just to sort of help mom create a routine during the day. Again, answer whatever questions, provide whatever guidance and advice that she might need, but that she has maybe some support during the day, or she's feeling confident enough about, handling the baby throughout the week, but just wanting that extra support a couple of times a week. Whereas a newborn care specialist very specifically is overnight care. A postpartum doula could also do overnight care. And again, in my experience, a lot of times, if I'm already providing daytime and me and that client have, meshed really well, they will ask me to do the evenings as well. So again, I go back into that schedule of like 9 p.m. until 3 o'clock the next day, and then I need a break. That type of lifestyle is really what it can look like. Depending on the postpartum doula or newborn care specialist, because we all sort of have a different way of doing business. We all have a different way of offering services. So some postpartum doulas may say, I only do 4 hours a day and I only do 2 days a week. or some newborn care specialists may say, I don't do daytime at all. I only do evenings overnight, and I only do 10 hours, or I only do 8 hours. They sort of have that autonomy to decide for their business model, for their lifestyle, and what they're comfortable with, what they're going to offer. I happen to have had the benefit of having enough of a support system even after having my first child. And my children are 15 years apart. So, I had quite a long time where I was just a mom of one, but I had a lot of support, not only in my marriage, but with my family members, that I could still navigate doing overnight, doing daytime, even though my daughter needed to be in school, or, needed someone to be home with her for bedtime. I was able to make it work for my family and our lifestyle to, put her to bed, and then mommy's gone for the night, dad's on duty. I come back in the morning, dad goes to work, I'm taking over, getting her ready for school and sending her off, and then having my day to myself to rest, so that I can be ready for, the next evening. So again, for newborn care specialists, they are typically specifically overnight care. A lot of times it's about a minimum of 10 hours, and you are literally there to support mom in the routine that she's creating for overnight care for that baby. So if a mom is breastfeeding and she wants you to bring baby to her bedside, that's a part of your job, is to, when baby wakes up, or if you're waking baby up on a schedule of every 2 to 3 hours for feedings, that, you have the ability to get baby up, check baby's diaper, make sure baby's good to go, and then bring baby to mom so that she can nurse. Or if mom wants to come maybe to the nursery from her bedroom, again, those are all things you would discuss with the client. And then once the feeding is done, a lot of times my clients, I tell them, just stay in bed. I will bring baby to you. You can nurse in bed with a nice nursing pillow, so that all you have to do is sit up, drink some water. We can turn on a small light that's not too bright. You can nurse baby. When baby's done, give baby to me. I will burp baby, and put baby back to sleep, so that mom can just slip back under the covers and go back to bed, because another 2 hours later, or, if we're following the baby schedule, whenever baby wakes up again for the next feeding, this is what we'll be doing all over again. So, like I said, it can look very different, but that's typically what's happening for newborn care all through the night, that the newborn care specialist is taking care of baby, to make sure that mom can rest, making sure that baby is, diapered and burped, and, change of clothes if they need to in the middle of the night because they've had a blowout, or, while baby is resting, a lot of times there's an opportunity for the newborn care specialist to do baby's laundry, maybe wash baby's bottles. And that happens like earlier in the night, so that everything is nice and clean, washes mom's pump parts. The idea is that you're really trying to take as much off of mom's plate as possible, so that she can just sort of do mom stuff, and not have to worry about some of those additional tasks. I also have a background right out of high school. I went to culinary school. And so I was a certified chef and worked in restaurants and catering. And once I left that to really focus more on childcare, it stayed with me throughout my experience as a doula. Even as a preschool teacher, there were times I had to prepare food, and I was able to pull from that experience. But I have always offered my clients the option of having me provide a plant-based meal for them, because I've also been plant-based for the last 15 years. And so that would be another benefit to them as sort of an a la carte service, is that I help them with baby through the night. First thing in the morning, before it's time for me to leave, I prepare a nice, healthy, plant-based meal for mom. I make sure she has all of her supplements, herbs, tinctures, teas, whatever it is that she needs for nourishing her body for the day. And I present that, to her so that she can eat before I go, because we know that once I'm not there, now she has to sort of juggle it herself. And so that's also been a very sacred, opportunity for me to be able to really, like I said, wrap my services around that mom to make sure that she's good to go. And if I'm not staying with her, into the next day, that she has everything that she needs to be successful with baby until I return again the next night, so that's the main difference, between postpartum doulas and a newborn care specialist.
Very nice. Thank you for that. It seems like it's a lot of work. I mean, being a mom in general is a lot of work, but also even to assist mom in in taking as much off her plate and sort of allowing her to rest. Because I mean, whether it's a normal vaginal birth or a cesarean, it's still a trauma to your body. And women have the right to heal. Any birthing person or woman that has given birth, either way, just has the right to rest. You know what I mean? And it is, I'm sure these families that have taken you on are just so grateful for your service, and just all the things that you provide, you know, because everything that you do is some sort of healing intervention and modality that just highlights something for them that is going to be more beneficial for them in the long term than just in the short term. So, you know, even if you're there for the 12 weeks or just during the 4 hours during the day, I mean, it's a breath. They can literally take a breath and just sort of sigh of relief. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, there's someone here who gets it, who understands. And I think it's interesting too, because just based off of your experience with that first family, you mentioned that you weren't a mom, in that you even though you were in a serious relationship, you were not married at the time. And so it almost proves the point that, you know, you can still be motherly without being a mom, and still be able to provide these services without actually having a child or children of your own at that time, and still come with all of the expertise and background and advice that you can offer, and help these families actually be like a treasure for them, to lean on and to glean from. So, you know, I think that that's just amazing. And you also mentioned about being a Kemetic Reiki practitioner. And so I wanted to just ask you, what is Kemetic Reiki? Because I've heard of kind of the typical traditional, like, I think it's Usui Reiki. I might be mispronouncing that, so forgive me. But I've heard of that, but I haven't heard of this particular style of Reiki. So if you wouldn't mind describing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, like I said, I initially learned about Reiki when I was looking for services, healing services after my daughter was born. And it was just something that was new and beautiful, and that I was like, that sounds great. You know, anything that's going to help me heal is what I want. And even though I didn't understand it fully, there was something intrinsically that made sense to me and that resonated with me. And it was more about, once I was on the table experiencing the healing, that the description of it or whatever it was supposed to mean on paper no longer mattered, because I knew what personal experience I was having. That was, you know, so beneficial to me. But like I said, years later, as I was searching for more ways to support families holistically and from a more spiritual point of view, because I was becoming more spiritual in my own journey, my own path, I found Kemetic Reiki. And Kemetic Reiki, and the way that I found it is that I found a Kemetic science temple. And Kemetic is just the ancient term for Egyptian, and Egyptian being a term related to an African civilization. And so as I continued to go further into my own lineage and to connect with my own ancestors, I found that Kemetic Reiki, or also known as Raseiki, it's this ancient science of spiritual healing that was practiced by Kemetic priests and physicians and laymen who were responsible for helping their communities heal. So when you had a problem or an issue, you would go and see one of them. But it also includes like very specific information about the power and energies of ancient gods and goddesses. And one in particular, her name is Sekhmet, and she's responsible for healing when there is sort of a destruction needed to rebuild, or something that needs to be destroyed and started over again. And then also Ma'at, who represents like complete balance, you know, so you have these two ancient Kemetic goddesses who are responsible for healing in these very specific ways that help you to not only address whatever ailment that you may have, but to also fill you with healing energy and power to continue to complete your healing over time, so that it's not something you just do sort of once and done, but it is, literally, quite literally taking all of this universal love and energy and power from the universe, from all of these practitioners, all these people who are pouring it out into the world, sending it out into the universe, to find ways to generate that, to pull it back in order to use it through yourself as a vessel, you, the healer, you, the priestess or practitioner, as I mentioned before, to be in such alignment with spirit that you are called to heal in this way. And so you are empowered to accept this healing energy into your vessel, into your body, and then through your hands and through your words and frequency, vibration, and energy, to send that universal transmuted healing energy into the person laying on the table or that you're working with, even for yourself, that you can do it on yourself to specifically address a particular, part of your body that has experienced stagnation or experiencing pain. And to be able to be very intentional about that healing, so that the person is getting the full benefit of what it feels like to have this energy, this light move through their body and addressing, like I said, just all these different areas of challenges or pain or discomfort that they might be feeling. And so it was just extremely relaxing for me, I think, postpartum. When I had my daughter, I wasn't sure if I felt healed initially, but I did feel relaxed. It was almost like doing meditation without anyone talking. It was just music playing and me being totally quiet with my eyes closed. But the more that I got it done, I would actually feel a warmth where the person's hands were. And I thought, am I imagining that? I was really questioning it because I was still very early in my spiritual journey. And I thought, I don't want to just be like, accepting something that someone's telling me is happening. I want to have evidence for myself. And there would be times where I would like peek with one of my eyes to see, are there hands in this area that I'm feeling this heat, especially if it was over my throat, over my stomach, or my womb, or if it was in certain areas near my knees where I was experiencing a lot of pain at the time. And that was what really made me a believer, is that I never even discussed it with that practitioner. I just kind of wanted to test it myself and to not have that be, I didn't want her to know, so that she couldn't maybe like adjust it or change it, and so that it could feel authentic. And when I recognize it, like, wow, she really is, using this energy to heal me. That belief that was, instilled in me in that moment propelled me to open myself up later on to become the healer that I am now, because I wanted other women to experience that same healing. I wanted it for myself. I wanted it for my family members, for my friends, for my community, but I especially wanted it for women who were having children. And I knew postpartum that there was sort of this area that I couldn't really touch, as a postpartum doula, as a newborn care specialist. I'm taking care of baby. I am helping mom, but I wasn't healing mom, and I wasn't empowering her or helping her find ways to heal herself. And so even though she was having a great experience with having help with baby, she was still maybe limping around or expressing a lot of discomfort and pain, or dealing with different things that maybe she didn't realize she was going to have to experience after having a baby. There's a bunch of things that are happening with your body that typically you might go back to a doctor to address, but there are some other things that, really I felt I could address through this healing modality. And so I just, I've really enjoyed when I have clients who are interested and want to just try it, hearing them give me a similar testimony of like, I heard about it. I'm so desperate, because I'm so uncomfortable that I'll pretty much try anything. I didn't know if it was going to work, but that they felt that warmth, that I felt all those years ago. And that's when I know that I'm really, doing the work that I'm called to do, when someone can give me that testimony and say, I didn't believe at first, I wasn't sure, But as soon as I just relinquished and let go and accepted that this was something that I could experience, I felt the shift. Maybe it wasn't the first session, maybe not even the second, but by the third or fourth or fifth session, when they really were able to, let go of all of the impeding thoughts of doubt, that they were actually able to tap into feeling a little tingle, feeling their, the hair rise on their arms, or getting goosebumps, or, feeling some type of sensation in their body that let them know that they were being activated for healing. And so, again, it's something that I feel very fortunate to have found and to be a practitioner of, and that I have seen it help so many of my clients that, I just want so many people to know about it, that there's an option out there. It doesn't have to specifically be Kemetic. Again, there's so many different ways to experience Reiki from different cultures and different perspectives of healing, but finding one that works for you and that really resonates and speaks to you, I think is important. And this one was the one that did it for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Because I know you mentioned that that baby Raiden is kind of like a Reiki baby.
Yes.
And and so did you do Reiki on him while he was in the womb, or is it just now?
Yeah, so I have friends who are Reiki practitioners, both Kemetic and otherwise. A lot of them are from more of a Eastern medicine background, a lot of Asian medicine background, so different variations of Reiki. But I kind of made it like my my focus for that particular pregnancy. That was my second pregnancy, to ensure that I got all of the services that I could possibly get.
Yeah.
With my children being 15 years apart, I was like, I'm gonna need as much healing as possible.
Absolutely.
But I knew I didn't want to wait until after he was born, because I had done so much research and experienced, so much in the 15 years between my two children, that I was prepared to, advocate for myself in that way, to ensure that I was able to go out and seek what I needed. And so, because I had knew so many people, I did like sessions all the time. I even had a good friend who, after work, she would come from her practice, where she was an acupuncturist, but she also does Reiki. And she would just, like, anytime we were hanging out together, she would just do it on my belly and, have me relax, so that she could give both me and Raiden Reiki energy. And I really needed it. My pregnancy with my son was very challenging, unlike my daughter. And so I was just really grateful that she was available to me, and many others were available to me to give that to me whenever we were just around each other as practitioners. And then once he was born, even in the NICU, because he came 3 months early, we gave him lots of Reiki energy. And it was so beautiful to see the doctors and nurses having such a reaction to his progress, because pretty much within the first, I want to say like 8 or 9 hours of him being born, he was born at like 3 p.m. on a Friday. By like 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning the next day, he was off of oxygen. And that's huge for babies who need oxygen when they're born too early. Their lungs are premature. They've got to stay on these ventilators and stuff. And not that he stopped receiving support altogether, but there's a level of, support that most NICU and preemie babies are receiving when they have this particular issue. And like I said, the next morning, for them to tell me that he was no longer on it, I was just like overwhelmed with joy. But I knew that it had a lot to do with some of this work we were doing to elevate him. And even though he was coming early, to support healing of his lungs and all of his organs, so that he didn't need a whole lot of help afterwards. And I really didn't want him to have steroids. I do see myself as more of a person who prefers the body to do its own healing and to sort of support the body in doing that, but not substituting or taking over when it's not absolutely life or death necessary. And so, since there was space for him to begin to show that his lungs were developing the way that they needed to, in order for him to come off of that first, sort of level of oxygen, I just kept giving him Reiki, every single day. And I was with him in the NICU for 5 days. And then I was discharged home, and then I was allowed to go back pretty much every day and stay as long as I wanted to.
Mm.
So every single day I would go back. I would do about 9 or 10 hours of him kangaroo care style on my chest, bare chest to chest. And I would just do hours of Reiki. I mean, like falling asleep
Oh,
Reiki
wow. Wow.
on him, on me. I have like videos and pictures of me just like, fully immersed in it, in the zone, in a full trance. And the doctors and nurses would just work around me, when they needed to do feedings for him through his tube. I was pumping breast milk for him and doing Reiki over my breast milk, and ended up being there for 6 weeks. And he came home at 5 pounds. He was born 2 pounds, 14 ounces.
Wow.
And he
Wow.
has just thrived, since then.
Yeah.
Never had to go back. He hasn't had any complications. And I mean, a lot of the success that he was having, I gave, reference to me being able to do Reiki, and knowing that so many friends were sending distance Reiki, we call it, to him and to me while we were there healing, that after our, initial stay in the hospital, we've never had to return. And now he is 15 months and, healthy, happy. He's walking now, and
Oh my gosh.
solid food. He started to say words,
Aw.
it's just so wonderful when you
Yeah.
have that, that level of comfort in a particular spiritual modality, and that you trust it fully to do what it is meant to do. And then watch it manifest right before you, that I've completely healed, from having an emergency C-section and having to give birth in that way. And I just overemphasize how important it is for women who are comfortable exploring this particular way of experiencing healing, that they give Reiki a try, and to open themselves to it. Again, it does require a mindset of openness. And I have seen it for myself when I was very closed off and unsure of it, similar to other types of healing modalities. One in particular is tapping, where, there was a period where like it didn't work for me. I'd be tapping like crazy, and I'm like, still angry, I'm still upset, I'm so frustrated. But I realized once I accepted that this is something that I'm doing for myself to heal myself, I really needed to commit to that. And in order to do that, I had to remove those doubtful thoughts and those thoughts that were impeding and getting in the way of my belief of it. Once I was able to remove them and to have full trust and faith that this could help me, tapping worked for me. So the same way Reiki works for me, and I think, like I said, it's really important for moms to know that this is something that is available to them, in addition to chiropractic care, in addition to Ayurvedic care, in addition to trying acupuncture and acupressure, and, having their feet massaged, all of these other things that, again, unfortunately, when you leave a hospital, you don't get a list of that. They don't tell you about those things. And so I find it, as I have transitioned into being a holistic wellness coach, that this is something that I want to share with my clients as an option, never forcing them, but making sure that they're aware of it so that they can make informed decisions about their healing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And PT. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's really important, because sometimes, maybe all the time, I don't know, moms are not really receiving so many resources, especially first time moms. And so they're always looking for something. They're looking for groups. They're looking for people to connect with. They're looking for a tribe, essentially. And, I think healing goes a long way. And, it's like what you said, healing is not something that you need to, take all of these, I guess, extraneous things, done in a holistic way. It can be preventative, as well as just sort of feeding the body what it needs mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and what you consume, through your eyes, ears, and smells and sights and stuff like that. So it really does help the body to heal thyself, type of thing. So, and I really do appreciate that, because as I mentioned before, we met at a vegan festival, and being plant-based myself, I think that sometimes there is a little bit of backlash with people who are plant-based, and there being especially supports for mothers, and how is it that you can go through a safe pregnancy while being plant-based, and um well, what about protein? I mean, that question is just such an old question. It doesn't really pop up as much because there's so much more out there. There's so much more knowledge out there. There's so many people that are influencers, and people like yourself who are kind of experts in the field. And, you can offer that to someone, and say, hey, you don't necessarily need meat. And if you're not going to at least give up meat, then a plant predominant diet is suitable. Now, granted, I'm not a dietitian, not a nutritionist, but at the same time, just sort of knowing the lifestyle that I've led, and similar to yourself, like, it's one where I'm not taking medications. You sort of go through whatever karmic portfolio you go through based off of genetics and other things that have happened, at least from even previous life experiences and stuff like that you may bring in with you in this particular lifetime. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily need to rely on other modalities that are very invasive to a point that they have so many different side effects and other things like that. So I wanted to just ask you quickly, before I move on to the next question, because I wanted to kind of get into kind of your health and wellness coaching and relationship coaching, and ask you some things about that. But have you received any sort of backlash, if you will, or people that are a bit skeptical about the whole plant-based lifestyle, and that maybe that choice that you wanted to lead for your own life, but also have you offered that as an option for people, and sort of advocated for that for mothers in their own journeys?
Yeah, so I definitely have. I actually saw this a lot during COVID in 2020 as a
Mhm.
doula, having families reach out to me who were unfortunately affected in a way financially that they weren't able to feed their families, the way that they typically do, and that moms were not getting the nutrition that they needed because they had a lack of food, because they had a lack of financial resources in order to get that food. And
Mhm.
although lots of organizations were coming together to provide food and meals for families, when families would say, oh, we're plant-based, we can't take this cheese, we can't take these eggs, we can't take this milk,
Mhm.
can't take this meat, that oftentimes organizations did not have a kind or
Mhm.
accommodating response to that. And I even had a client tell me that she was told, well, if you're hungry, you'll eat it. And, that to me goes beyond backlash. It's just like completely disrespectful,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and so because there wasn't a lot of advocacy for that, I found myself standing in the gap and sort of trying to be this advocate for
Mhm.
any clients or people that I knew personally who were going through that,
Mhm.
by reaching out to these organizations and making them aware that there are going to be families who are plant-based and do not partake in consuming these particular animal products or byproducts that still deserve to eat,
Mhm.
that still deserve to be, nurtured and to have the food that they need to sustain their health and their families' vitality. And if they wanted ideas about that or what that could look like, that I was more than happy to consult with them and help them create packages, that were plant-based friendly. But no one wanted to do that.
Mhm.
I felt at times very disappointed that these organizations that have, the best of intentions, and they are helping thousands of people who do eat those foods and do find a value in consuming them, that for those of us who don't and the families who don't, that there was just like this really aggressive attitude about like, this is an emergency, you
Mhm.
should make, an exception for this. There should never be this preference, that you're asking for over other people who probably have preferences too, but we're just kind of doing a standard one size fits all, and you either take it or you don't.
Mhm.
And one organization that I've been very proud of in watching their transition to support plant-based families is WIC.
Mm.
And I've gone to several appointments with my clients and have received WIC myself,
Mhm.
and been able to benefit from them having a package for plant-based moms and families that includes tofu and beans and soy
Mhm.
milk, so that we don't have to be stuck with just the eggs, milk, and cheese that are the traditional offerings, and even that has been like such a huge, benefit to families who are plant-based. But I do still see that there's so much work that can be done. There's so many families that still really struggled during their pregnancies to maintain a plant-based diet. I know lots of moms who, just because of the pressure and, the isolation of being, in lockdown and things like that, that they chose to adopt a more vegetarian or even pescatarian diet
Mhm.
in order to get their nutritional, needs met, because they just didn't have the capacity to access the plant-based foods that they were used to being able to access when they were more financially sound.
Mhm.
And just that in their communities, the offerings again just did not mimic, the dietary choices that they were making. So I did do a lot more work to provide plant-based meals to my clients. I was very, satisfied in my capacity to do that and to encourage and support and guide other doulas to do the same for their plant-based clients. So we did what we could with the
Mhm.
families that we were close to and had access to us. But again, I know that there were so many families expressing, just how difficult it was. And a lot of times, there's sort of this running joke that like people will offer you like steamed vegetables or French fries, or salad, and think that like somehow that's acceptable, when like any one person is going to just eat those three things for any extended period of time. That's not
Mhm.
even healthy in a day, to
Mhm.
just consume those things. And so really just being able to have honest conversations about the amount of accommodation that it does require, and that it's actually not very difficult. Although we're asking that you provide options like chickpeas and tofu and lentils and things like that, fruits and vegetables, that these are things that typically are already offered alongside the meat proteins and the dairy. It's
Mhm.
just that they're not exclusively packaged together with enough of them to satisfy a family who is strictly plant-based. And so again, approaching it in an honest conversation to say that this is doable, it
Mhm.
just takes some consideration, and some thinking and planning. But just like any other type of diet, whether it's kosher or gluten-free, it just takes that respect, that is needed in order to create something that is necessary and also that is enough, to satisfy a family's nutritional needs.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's unfortunate because, you know, not only do I think, and I know that we're kind of coming up on time. Do you have a little bit more
I'm
time?
good. Yeah.
Okay, all right, awesome. But yeah, I know, like, it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people out there that just sort of think that, um, even in an emergency, that a person's lifestyle is somehow going to change. And yeah, even if you're not financially sound and stable at that particular time, you may make concessions and things of that nature. But um, you know, at least for me, and I'm sure I'm also speaking for you. This is since I've been a baby. I've been plant-based since that time, and I'm not going to change that for anybody. I mean, you could offer me $1 million and I'm still not
Right.
going to change. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? The way that I feel, the way that, the way that I live, again, it's a lifestyle. When we say plant-based, and I think you and I can agree on this. It's not simply just vegan or vegetarian. We're talking about like whole food plant-based.
Right.
And this is something different as opposed to, because you can have a vegan or vegetarian junkie, that are just eating the processed foods, the Beyond Burgers and things of that nature. And, you know, that's nice. That's an alternative to, the meat-based proteins. but at the same time, it's still not whole food plant-based, which includes a variety of different things. It's not just rabbit food that people often sometimes assume that people who are plant-based eat, and there's so many different daggers, and we could sort of go down a rabbit hole really, about the rabbit food. But it's a shame that you still see that type of reaction, even in an emergency. And I'm hoping that we do better. Like you mentioned, WIC is doing better, and is also someone or an organization that you advocate for. So I'm hoping that other women can also check that out if they're interested in that. And yeah, I mean, even from our standpoint, I know, at least for me in my profession, also, helping people to understand what whole food plant-based living is. And it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle, and it is not as difficult as people sort of make it seem. And you can still get all of your adequate macronutrients, micronutrients. And I'm a documentary junkie, and I've watched so many documentaries out there that have supported whole food plant-based. And if you look at the things that go into people's food, be it processed or otherwise, not good. It's not good. You don't even want to know what goes in it. Ignorance is bliss, so to speak. So just because it tastes good, and the marketers and advertisers and all the people, these big major corporations, they know that it's going to make you addicted to those types of foods. They're going to continue to people are still going to continue to be the sort of the run of the mill, and be like those hamsters in the wheel, just kind of going on and on and on. And then we wonder why we have obesity as an epidemic. We wonder why we have childhood obesity as an epidemic. We wonder why people are having diabetes skyrocket through the roof, why they're having, the cardiovascular issues that they're having, and gout, and so many other things. Even years past, when they initially had the first occurrence. And just something as simple as what you consume, and really understanding food as being medicine, and not simply just something that will fill you up and keep you going to work your 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks. We could go down a whole thing with this, because I have so much to say about it. But I think that there's so many determinants of why, especially the Western world is in this problem in the first place, and why, while we're embracing plant-based living and plant-based lifestyles, we could certainly do better. And people, just as people are starting to embrace, and yes, there's pushback, but just as people are starting to embrace and be respectful of gender affirmations, it's the same way about lifestyle affirmations, in terms of plant-based living and stuff of that nature. So and I actually did want to ask you, before we get into the relationship coaching, so and this is sort of a sensitive topic, in terms of gender affirmations, for some. And there are a lot of people who work in your field, and who are postpartum specialists in some way, and they're working with women, they're working with moms, they're working with individuals who are okay being called that and address that. And at the same time, there is a community that is not okay being addressed as that. They prefer certain pronouns, and they prefer being called a birthing person. So I guess I wanted to understand how you have addressed that in your field, and what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because it's a great conversation, and it is sensitive but necessary to discuss. I always say that just because something difficult, uncomfortable, sensitive, controversial even, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's necessary to talk about it
Mhm.
and to really have a full understanding of what it is, so that when you do address it, that you can address it with love and compassion and empathy and respect and understanding.
Mhm.
And so, yes, I have assisted families that did not want to be called mama or mother or be referred to as her or she. Um, and in those, conversations that I had with those particular clients, I really appreciated them educating me on, their perspective and lifestyle and their choices to affirm themselves and to want to identify the way that they choose to identify. And that my only goal was to support them and to assist them to ensure that they were respected in those choices and in those requests. Um, and that they also understood that it was important for me, as the practitioner that I am and the professional that I am, that when I am, talking about it, writing about it, sharing about it, and I'm referring to the clients that I work with as mothers, as women, as mamas, as she and her, that this does not take away from anyone who identifies either, under any of those particular titles or labels, or who does not. That it really does speak to anyone who is having a baby, and I love just being able to say it that way, whether we choose the term birthing person or any, term that is introduced to me, that if the person is standing right in front of me and this is, my client or a person that I just met, off the street, and they say, I want to be, addressed as XYZ, that's what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
And that's just I call it universal respect. Just you have a obligation to
Mhm.
respect a person who you've met and is affirming themselves and made you aware of that, to empower you to do so. And
Mhm.
when you're not empowered to do so and you don't know any better, then it's not your fault, and you're in a position of ignorance and you have an opportunity to learn, because ignorance doesn't mean that you are not an intelligent person or that there's anything wrong with you. It just simply means that there is a lack of information, available to you, and that you're moving in a way that does not include that information. But once you have it, you're no longer ignorant. Now you are in the know and you are empowered to support that person however you best can, if that is the role that you have in their life. And so, although I do not change any of my referencing on my website and my marketing material in conversation when I'm discussing the client group that I support, I always say that I'm supportive of mothers and women, and a lot of times specifically first-time moms, although first-time moms are not the only moms that need support.
Mhm.
But that does not, in my practice, negate or minimize or um, uh, cause the population of people who don't want to go by that title to exist in a space where they're not seen or heard.
Mhm.
And in fact, I am inclusive in choosing to use these terms to be sort of umbrella terms, mama and mother and woman in the context of birth, for me, is inclusive of anyone that is having a baby. And so when I meet families who are comfortable with that terminology, even if they do identify as a different pronoun, I am always very respectful of how I am interacting with them and making sure that they understand that my terms and the vernacular that I'm using to describe the type of clients that I support is necessary, and it does come from my own personal beliefs and how I choose to express myself in discussing and talking about the people that I serve, the population that I serve. But it is not meant in any way to minimize their experience, their truth, and who they are and how they show up in the world. And so again, I believe that both can exist at the same time.
Mhm.
I can say that I'm here to support birthing mothers and women who are having babies, and that can be inclusive of a birthing person whose pronoun is them, they, or he, him. It does not take away from their experience as a birthing person, just because I don't say birthing person, or that my website says women or mothers, that this is inclusive of them.
Mhm.
And that, again, if the person is right in front of me, if I'm taking on a client, I do not force terms or titles on them, just like they don't do with me,
Mhm.
and again, it's all about respect at the end of the day. So again, I never shy away from those conversations. I think it's important to have them. I
Mhm.
think it's beautiful that we can coexist in this way, and that there doesn't actually have to be a whole lot discussed, once somebody tells you something about them. Um, that you are in a space of service, and so this is a part of what you're doing, is to support that person,
Mhm.
and to also have the respect from that person to understand your position in choosing to use terms that may not be acceptable for them in their own identity, but that are still understood to be inclusive of them.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that. It's beautifully said. And I think I also, um, share those same sentiments in terms of, um, not necessarily changing my vernacular, but at the same time, embracing, and also I like the term that you use, universal respect, and that's just kind of a basic common human courtesy, to another human being, from another human being. So I think that was very, very well said. Okay, so I wanted to ask about, these kind of wellness and relationship coaching, because you've had experience with it, even with the first family, going from you sort of seeing changes with the dynamics between the husband and the wife, until eventually it led to a separation. So I wanted to, let's start with just parents before we move into just like relationship dynamics. So are there things that parents are missing in terms of raising children? And then, sort of as a follow-up to that, like, what are parents doing well in your experience?
So yeah, because of my own experiences, as well as my experience starting off as a preschool teacher and then learning about people's, relationships and lives before I became a certified professional life coach. I was just a babysitter or nanny sitting on the couch of a family who, after the kids were asleep and, it's time for me to go, they tended to like offer me, something to eat or drink, and, to want to talk to me. And I noticed that I'd be standing at the door for a while until we eventually sat down because they really wanted my ear, and it's a sacred position that I take very seriously, that initially I fought it a little because I kept thinking, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to give them, bad advice. Sorry, you're hearing my son in the background. But
Oh, no, I can hear.
I wanted to just make sure that I didn't tell them something that was going to steer them wrong or, make their situation worse. But intrinsically, I always felt like I had an answer. I had a great example from my parents growing up, although they did separate after I was out of the house. And I grew up with healthy people around me, healthy relationships, examples of healthy relationships, and was raised in a family that valued family and relationships. And so I just always felt like, well, I can at least share what I know, and if it helps someone, great. And they can take what helps them and discard what doesn't. But from that space, eventually I did want to have more of a professional, perspective, and to educate and train myself in whatever ways that I could, so that I could really stand firm on some of the things I was sharing that were very much wrapped up in my own opinions. I wanted to be careful not to, again, steer someone in a direction that might harm them or cause them to do something where they're like, well, you told me to do this, and then
Mhm.
for me to not be aware of like the potential hazards that might cause for that person, or, the destruction that could, occur from that, or just things not going the way that we, particularly thought that it would. And me not being able to have a backup plan or another way to support them once plan A didn't work. So yes, I've seen a lot of families struggle with raising children and wanting to know, as a preschool teacher initially from me, well, what do you do to get my kid to eat? Because they don't eat for me. Or what do you get them? How do you get them to nap? They don't nap for me. Or how did you get my baby to, do whatever it was that they were struggling at home to do?
Mhm.
And I looked at that as like, well, some of that is just different environment. We're at the preschool, you're not around. We don't necessarily react the same way emotionally to their cues, the way that a family member or caregiver at home does. And
Mhm.
so a lot of times we're not affected by the child's reaction in a way that disables us, to get something in particular done. And because we're used to being around, a lot of times I worked in infant classrooms where it would be one teacher to 4 infants, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
And that means you have to, be prepared that one might need a diaper, one might need a bottle, one might need a nap, and the other one might be teething. What are you
Mhm.
going to do? These are your 4 babies. It
Goodness.
forces you to kind of be a mother of 4,
Mhm. Mhm.
ironically, for the 8 or 9 hours that they're with you for the day, where you're responsible for all of their care. And
Wow.
so, of course, you're going to learn things in that experience that wouldn't traditionally happen in a home environment where it's a mother or father or caregiver to one baby. So
Mhm.
that abundance of information of learning how to make certain things work, because you got to do what you got to do from a professional standpoint, and also from your own sort of comfortability and whatever additional skills you might be bringing in from your personal experiences in life, it really kind of goes to show the strengths of that particular teacher or caregiver.
Mhm.
So some of it, again, was just in that space where it wasn't that the parent was doing something wrong, but that the caregiver was getting more, out of the child because of their experience being isolated in the, childcare center or preschool center. Whereas at home, it's a lot more difficult because the mom is just focusing on that baby specifically and doesn't have a break. They don't get to take the 15-minute breaks that we get to take. They don't get to take the hour lunch break that we get to take. They don't get to call out because they're sick or that, they need a day off or they're on vacation. That mom is like in it, every
Mhm.
single day, 24 hours a day. And that makes
Mhm.
a huge difference on the impact of that mom, her mental health and her physical health as well. So that's usually where I see the problems start to brew, is that mom or caregiver doesn't have a whole lot of support at home and they're doing it all by themselves and kind of burning out. But then
Mhm.
as the child gets older, because my expertise goes from ages 0 to 21, if you can believe it,
Wow.
I added on so much more, to my professional resume, that I was able to continue to work with families despite them not having infants and children who were under 5. Now I was dealing with 5 to 8 and 8 to 15 and 15 to 21,
Wow.
so seeing that there were different levels of care
Mhm.
based off of your child's age and development. I did notice that if a mom or caregiver was being very lenient, there are different types of parenting styles. And if their style was very lenient, where they were kind of letting the child run the show, they were letting the child make all of the decisions. The parent was kind of laissez-faire and just allowing the child to kind of do whatever they wanted with no real consequences, that it made it harder as a child got older to ring them back in when they were making decisions that were a lot more, destructive or problematic, in their development, because they go from being, just a couple of months old to a year to you start seeing some tantruming and some pushback, some resistance. And if the child is getting the message from the parent that I throw a tantrum and then I get my way, well, eventually they're not necessarily going to need to physically throw that tantrum in the same way, but they're going to figure out another way to throw that tantrum verbally or with their body language or behavior to still try and enact that same privilege that you've provided them, that I throw a tantrum and I get my way. And
Mhm.
then as they get older, it becomes the narrative becomes that the parent tells them something that they don't believe. They just don't trust it. They've learned from the laissez-faire parent that the parent can say, "Oh, don't do that," But I always say, if there's not a or else at the end of that, then there is not going to be a whole lot of reason or incentive for that child to take you seriously and to do what you're asking them.
Mhm.
Similarly to if you make idle threats or threats that you can't really keep, oh, if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going to have anything else to eat ever. Well, when the child sees that after a couple of hours of tantruming, that you're panicking because you recognize as a parent, you don't want your child to go the whole day without eating, and you give in and give them the food that they wanted as opposed to the food that you provided to them. Again, you're sending a message to that child that I just have to do this tantrum long enough and to wear my parent down long enough for them to eventually give in. And I'm going to wait for that giving because I know it's coming, because I know that this is what they've taught me, that I just got to wait for them to buckle and I will get my way. So I see that happening up until, when they're in elementary school, junior high school. And then as frightening as that becomes, junior high school and high school, it gets really scary. Parents who have told me, my child, I told them not to take the car, they're 16 or 17, and they took my car anyway and totaled it. They could have killed themselves or someone else because they didn't take me seriously. When I say no, that no just means not right now, or no just means yes, quite frankly, because there isn't a clear communication about boundaries and a clear communication about consequences. So that's sort of an extreme example, but one that I see often and has, really shaped how I coach my parents. Because their issues can be vast, and that particular one is one that I see more often than anything else, that the parent is really struggling, that the child is at a particular age where they just won't listen, they're screaming, crying, kicking. It seems like that there's no communication effectively happening, and they're trying to figure out, how do I get my child to listen? How do I communicate with them? How do I get them to take me seriously or to respect me? And a lot of times when I go back and look through, well, how did this dynamic start? It started from the parent that was, just not creating those particular foundations in the beginning of their parenting journey with that child. However, what I'm seeing that parents are doing well is that they're asking for more help these days. I find a lot more parents are reading books. A lot more parents are following, bloggers or influencers who specifically focus on parenting, coaches and, speakers, experts, to find strategies to help them deal with the issues that come up in their parenting, and that they're actually implementing those and seeing the differences. And so one that I really love and have used since my daughter, who's now 15, was 6 months, is Parenting with Love and Logic. I'm a facilitator of this particular program. It's been out for over 35 years at this point. And it's amazing because it allows you to support families through their parenting class who have children from ages as young as 6 months all the way to 21 years of age, as I mentioned, because they really focus on the parent allowing natural consequences to teach the child the lessons that they need to learn, so that you can continue to love your child and be the loving parent that you want to be, but also using logic and empowering your child to think critically about the choices that they're making and allowing natural consequences to teach them from that perspective. And so one example of that would be with my now 15-month-old son, that we do, or I will say, if I don't want him to do something. And initially, when he was just about 6 months old and I started doing this, he would just look at me, like, not really sure what I'm saying. But after he got to a point where he could grab something, or when he started crawling in a particular direction or getting into things, I could say, and he would turn and look, because he's now anticipating that this means something. What does the sound mean? He doesn't really know a whole lot of words at, 1 year old, but what does this sound mean? What happens after he hears, Well, what happens is I come over and pick him up and I put him in a different place, because whatever he was about to do, I don't want him to do. And he would eventually make his way back over. And as he's getting about halfway there, I would say, and he would stop and turn and look. And sometimes out of curiosity, he would wait to see, okay, nothing's happened yet. Let me get a little closer. And right before he's about to grab whatever he's going to grab or do whatever he's going to do, I would say, and pick him up and walk him to a different place far from wherever he was just at. And we call it the uh-oh song in Love and Logic. It's one of the strategies. And
Mm.
he would cry. He would get upset. His natural emotions would come up. He would recognize, wait a minute, I was just this close and now I've been moved, right? And it didn't require that I had to say no, which I'm very much an advocate of not using that word at all. I'm against no altogether. I didn't have to say no. I didn't have to, punish him or do anything aggressive. And that my voice is still light and sing-songy, I call it, which is why it's the uh-oh song, because we're singing uh-oh in order for them to key in on, oh, this means I can't do what it is I was about to do, or that something is not permitted, right? All of that communication just from saying this sound. As a child gets older, though, we're going to use more words, right? And so I like to implement words that I find are more rooted in manners, right? And teaching children the importance of manners. And so now that he's a little bit older, even though I still use uh-oh, I will say, no, thank you, all done. And that way he's now getting some words as well to go along with the sentiment of mommy doesn't want me to do something, and she's communicating that. And when he does feel sad and he does fall apart and he is crying, I just simply pick him up and offer him some nurturing. I'm gonna plug my laptop in here. It's telling me the battery's getting low.
Okay.
But I just offer him some nurturing so that I get to still love on my baby. This is why love and logic is so important, because we don't want to lose that love. Everything that we do should be rooted in love when it comes to our children. So as soon as he starts crying, I'm holding him in my arms and loving on him and making sure that he feels secure, but I'm not giving him his way. If I said, uh-oh, if I said, if I said, no, thank you, then that's what it is. And we're going to move away from that. And I'm now going to love on you through this transition of you not getting what you want and thinking critically and the way that he's able to as this, young baby about what it is that just occurred. And now we've gotten to the point where if I say, he will turn and look and kind of laugh at me and walk the other direction. I could be all the way across the room. He could be getting ready to try to pull one of the plugs out of the wall or something that he got to that he shouldn't be near, or pull something down off of the table, or grab a glass of water that I've left kind of low enough for him to reach. And I look across the room and see him and say, and then he will just turn immediately and walk away, or he'll start crying. Won't touch it. Won't walk and do whatever else he was going to do. He'll stop in that moment because he's feeling something that's coming from this message that he's getting, despite the language barrier that exists when he can't really talk yet. So it's the same as you move on in age. As children get older, when a child does something that you don't like, we have another phrase that says, oh, bummer. And oh man, you don't want your parent to say, oh, bummer, because that means that there's definitely a consequence coming. However, it may be a delayed consequence that doesn't happen right now. And the child has to think now, oh man, I messed up. I wonder what my parent's going to do. And there may not be a whole lot of conversation right in that moment about what's going to happen. However, there's an expectation that is set that I did something that I wasn't supposed to do. My parent acknowledged it, but there didn't need to be a whole back and forth. There didn't need to be a bunch of threatening and, punishing and, making the child feel terrible, because children are going to make mistakes. And we have to create a safe environment for them to do that. And so this particular parenting program allows you to do that with your child, to use these phrases that help you stay calm, but also help them to stay calm and to start thinking, so that the next time that they're thinking about doing something and they remember, this was a bummer response from mom last time. And a couple of days later, my, PlayStation disappeared, or my favorite bike, or, the family all went out for ice cream and I had to stay home. I didn't get to participate, that whatever the natural consequences are, that the family no longer has to feel, or the parent no longer has to feel like the bad guy, but instead that they can teach their children natural consequences, have these experiments, we call them, to set up opportunities for us to teach them so that when they get out into the world, we don't have to worry about them so much. We know that they have the skills and the critical thinking ability to think about what are going to be the consequences of the actions, that I'm going to take right now. What's going to happen right now and later? How is this going to affect my life? That's what we want for our children when they become adults, to be critical thinkers. And so again, that's what I see parents doing well, is researching these classes, signing up to take the class that I offer, and really using these strategies to empower themselves to be the best parents that they can be.
It's really fascinating conversation, really fascinating. So I just wanted to finish up with one last question, then I'll let you go. So just in terms of relationships, because, obviously, there's the parent to child dynamic, there's the opposite, the child to parent, and then there's husband and wife, or just the caregivers, whoever they might be. So you mentioned about, sort of feeling like mentally exhausted, and, that can sort of lead to maybe the laissez-faire parenting, or it can also even lead to the parent who may give some threats. So I guess I wanted to ask, like, in terms of the breakdown of a relationship between, say, two spouses or two partners, what advice do you give them when you start to notice that there's tension, when you start to notice that there's some mental exhaustion, and maybe they need to take a moment and just breathe? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I always offer I offer my services or my advice or guiding or coaching to the level and request of my client. So even if I notice something is happening, if they're not specifically asking me to address it, I'm very careful and respectful not to put them on Front Street, not to make them feel terrible or on the spot about anything. However, if I do notice that something is happening that they're not asking me for support around, however it's affecting the child, then I will bring it to their attention in the way that I see it affecting the child, which oftentimes invites them to discuss what's actually happening in their relationship dynamic. And so that's sort of the way that I approach it if it's not something that they've brought to me. But if they're bringing something to me and they're saying, one of the ones I get mostly from moms, which, no shade to the dads, but, from a professional perspective, about 80% of my moms, share with me that the husbands are not helping at night, that they want their sleep, that somehow they believe that this is mom's thing, and whatever the dynamic of their relationship is, it's led them to this place where the mom is feeling like she's not supported, and that the dad is feeling like he needs to sleep. That this is not his area, and for different reasons, this has come up. I've had families who the husband was a surgeon, he's a brain surgeon. He cannot be up in the middle of the night and exhausted doing brain surgery the next morning, so it's sort of understood in their dynamic that he wasn't going to be as available, for that. However, that's why I'm there. That's why I know this, because they have taken the time to still create support for mom by hiring me to come in and to be available to her so that dad can sleep through the night. However, in situations where that's not possible and the family cannot afford that, and the mom is feeling exhausted because she doesn't have help from dad, or dad is trying to help, but there's frustration in the middle of the night about who gets up, who does what's happening, whether or not they're on the same page about whether baby should, be allowed to cry, if they're doing a cry it out for sleep training, or, if they should be, giving baby a support throughout the night and not allowing baby to cry at all. These are some of the conversations that really do indicate to me that they're not on the same page, and that might be where some of the frustrations are coming from.
Mm.
So for me, it's really important to support my couples on coming to, common ground about these particular areas, and to actually discuss, well, what does this mean for you? And what does this mean for you? And what would be ideal for you? And what would be ideal for you? And then how can we come together and compromise, or come to an agreement, meet each other in the middle, so that everybody is getting some of what they need? Because there may not be a perfect solution, but there is a solution nonetheless, where they can live in harmony together and not have to feel at odds with one another, because then that does trickle down to their interactions with their babies and their children and the rest of their family. And of course, between the two of them. So I have seen couples who were happy and really in love and feeling really secure have a baby, and suddenly everything break down. And it was because they did lack the skills and support and knowledge and understanding and awareness of how having a new baby would affect their relationship. And so they needed somebody to come in and say, this is normal. This is normal. This is okay. Here's how we can navigate that. Here's all you have to do for that, in order to help them get to that happy medium. But a lot of times it is just about them experiencing it first, to know that, yeah, this is really something we're struggling with, and to be willing to ask for help. And from that perspective, I'm able to help them see how they can support each other, because that's really what's most important. When I'm not there, something's still got to be working. So if the issue is that mom isn't feeling supported, or that dad is feeling overwhelmed, then we talk about self-care and how are they both making sure that their needs are getting met, separate from the relationship that they've now created to care for the baby, to be, co-caregivers to this baby. How are they taking care of themselves outside of those roles? And not, are they still making time for date nights? Are they still making time for romance with one another? And just being available to talk and have a moment, or have they taken on this more anxious position of not letting anybody else into the home, or to take care of the baby, and needing to put all the obligation and responsibility on themselves, to the extent that they are now burning out, and that clearly isn't working, So it's, per client, obviously no one size fits all, but I really encourage them to not forget about the importance of their own self-care, and that their role in supporting one another with the baby, that it doesn't have to be that one person is doing everything, that they can split up the roles and the things that they feel most comfortable doing. Some dads that don't feel comfortable at changing diapers, I'm not there to change his mind or to make him feel bad because he doesn't want to change diapers, but he's going to take out the diaper pail. When mom is the one changing the diaper, she should never have to take out that trash then, because that's what she should be able to do.
Right.
And similarly with mom, if she's saying that she doesn't want to breastfeed, maybe she just wants to do bottle feeding, that dad can support her by making sure that all of her pumping equipment and that her bottles are clean and, available for her, so that she doesn't have to worry about that, so like I said, those are just some smaller, issues that I see come up. But those are really important.
Yeah. I mean, talking about like burnout from the perspective of being a parent, like it's important because it can happen. It's not just in your job, field and stuff like that you will notice in a professional life that also can lead to burnout. It's even as a parent. Oh, it's baby Raiden. Hi, baby Raiden. Hi. But yeah, no, this has been hi. This has been a really like amazing and fascinating discussion with you. I mean, your wealth of knowledge, I mean, a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And I mean, I would love to have you on again to be able to discuss more, because this is just, there's so much more that I feel needs to be spoken about and discussed and shared. And I would love to kind of field questions from people and for people to just be able to be able to ask, whatever it is that they want to ask, but yeah, I just want to thank you so much, for just for your time, and, and extending your time as well. My stomach's actually rumbling right now, so it looks like I'm hungry. But I guess baby Raiden and I are both feeling hungry right now. So I can feel what he's going through. But yeah, no, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your expertise, your knowledge, everything that you've shared today. And I'm hoping that, the families that watch this, the mothers that watch this, the birthing persons that watch this, they get something from it, because I know that they will, because there's so much there. You've literally dropped so many golden nuggets. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And yeah, I'm just gonna stop the recording, and then we'll kind of close. Thank you guys. Take care.